Hello and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today in this session of Impact on Digital Data Protection Bill 2022 on the telecom sector. I would like to request the speakers to introduce yourselves to our audience, please. Thank you.
I will just go first. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Rahul Puri, and I have worked in and around the telecom sector for now nearly 2 decades. And looking forward to this very interesting conversation on the impact of the DPDPB on the telecom sector.
Okay, so thank you, Bhaskar, for inviting me. My name is Kush Kaushik. I have been into information security and compliance space for more than 15 years, which includes also privacy. I am currently a co-founder at Scrut Automation, where we help companies in automating their security and privacy compliance.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Sujandan Selvendran from Sri Lanka. I'm working at Data PLC at the moment. So I have worked in telecom sector for almost 16 years now, and currently into data privacy office. I'm heading the data privacy office at Dialog. So that's about me.
Hi everyone, my name is Abneesh. I head the legal and privacy for Voice, which is Vodafone Intelligence Solution. Vodafone Intelligence Solution, as some of you would know, is the IT, ITS, and technological arm for Vodafone Group. That's the brief about me. Previously, I've been in the roles which have encompassed both legal and privacy. That's all about me. Thank you.
Thank you, Abneesh. Before we begin, a brief intro about Tsaaro. Tsaaro is a leading privacy and security services provider which helps businesses achieve their compliance with upcoming data privacy and security laws. And here's a brief disclaimer that the views presented here are personal and not of any particular organization. The discussion or points being raised during this session are intended for educational purposes only. Today we are going to cover the privacy rules and risks in the telecom sector. How do laws like EU GDPR regulate the telecom sector? How does the DPDP Bill apply to telecom sector? What are the obligations of data fiduciaries? How will the DPDP Bill regulate privacy risks in the telecom sector? And can the penalties under the bill act as a deterrent? Okay, before beginning, I would like to give a brief introduction of the DPDP bill that we are discussing about. It's a digital personal data protection bill which was published in November 2022 for public consultation. The history or the journey of this bill is something which started in 2018 with the first draft of personal data protection bill coming out, and then in 2019 we saw a revised draft. After which the Joint Parliamentary Committee suggested some amendments, around 81 amendments to a bill of 99 sections, in which there were some 17 major amendments, and the recommendations and the suggestions were taken in for consideration, and a new bill was drafted, which was published in 2022. And yeah, we will begin with the discussion now. What are the biggest privacy risks in telecom sector? Rahul, I would like to invite you to discuss this.
Sure, thanks, Bhaskar. Let's first understand that how telecom sector is, and the most peculiar point in the telecom sector, which I believe, is that telecom sector itself is providing the key component of a personal data. Just a while ago, about an hour back, I got a call, and that person checked with, it was from an unknown number, that person checked with me whether I was Rahul Puri working with a different firm than which I am working with. And that's when I realized, of course, it was a wrong number. And that's when I realized that my phone number is the most closest for identity, one of the unique identity that I carry. It's not my name any longer. Just understand this scenario. Let this sink in. And then we understand that the biggest privacy risks which a telecom sector might carry. Of course, there are risks. Of course, there are panelists from the security side of the organizations who would talk about risk related to hacking, ransomware, DDoS, and things like this. But personally, for me, the biggest risk is in the space of which is happening today is in the space of wishing and phishing.
If you have that kind of a database to start off with, and these are only the data entry points at the time of subscriber data when the subscribers provide those data to the telecom companies, and then this gets added on during the course of time. So I think, and while some of the privacy risks are, how the telecom companies process the sensitive information, are they using consent as one of the basic ingredients of processing their information. That's one. While you would also understand that most of the telecom companies partner with technological companies to build products, etc. So is there any SPDA process involved during their product building? Do they adhere to the data retention rules? What is the governance around any DSR request that comes up to them? And what are the mechanism through which they address their data breach management? So all of these may apply to the other companies as well. I think it will apply to most of the other companies as well. But because the magnitude of data that the telecom companies have, it's just far outweighs any other organization combined. So I think these are the things that are very important. And then, of course, I mean, there are infosec side of it, and there are panelists around that as well. But now regarding the new technologies that are coming up, so for example, IoT, uh, you know, uh, DDoS was already mentioned before, hacking, cloud threats, etc., etc. Along with any third-party risk that comes through vendors, partners, email service providers, web hosting companies, data management companies, etc. All of these do pose the privacy risk for the telecom companies at this point of time.
Thank you, Abhinesh. I think this is quite right when you say telecom industry has the largest database as compared to other organizations in different industries. As per the national, I have some data here. As per National Digital Communications Policy of 2018, which was published by Ministry of Communications, there were over a billion mobile phones and mobile phone users and digital identities in India at that point. There are more than half a billion internet users in India. India has already the highest mobile data consumption in the world. There are over 200 million Indians who regularly use social media. So I think this is quite right to say the privacy risks are comparatively higher in telecom industry. Definitely.
Yeah, from my point of view, we have addressed the security part of it in the telecom sector in Southeast Asia for quite a long time now, right? So because we are dealing with confidential data, and we consider the privacy as part of confidential data. Now we are differentiating the confidential data and personal data because we have empowered the customers now for certain rights. So the data principals have their own rights, and they can come back to you and question you on how you are doing or executing or using or processing or storing their data. So that is going to come into the front now, right? So with these DPDP bills coming into play and also the privacy risk.
So okay, moving on to the next one. Okay, yeah. How do laws like EU GDPR regulate the telecom sector? Abanish, would you like to take this up?
Whenever any privacy legislation is enacted across the globe, and this is for any privacy legislation, customer facing companies usually get mostly affected among these companies. And the telecom companies are the ones which store more personal data. And I think this discussion was more pronounced when you raised the first question around it. These companies store more personal data than any other companies. So with most of the telecommunication companies storing valuable data of their customers, GDPR will significantly affect the sector. And it has been now nearly 5 years now, so it has already started doing so. So these regulations dictate the telecom companies should ensure data portability. This means that they should be able to provide consumers with a copy of their personal data in an electronic structured format. Therefore, keeping track of the data in a coherent and usable manner would be very essential for the telecom companies.
See, these these privacy laws, I like this, the 2022 law, the bill, if it comes as a law, the best thing about these is like it helps in creating that discipline around uh, maintaining that security and privacy posture within the sector itself. And if you see the telecom sector, these laws actually help in national interest also, because there's so many millions and trillions of citizens data which is residing. And if there is some breach which happens, so many individuals are at risk on that breach. And as other panelists also told, that how these laws regulate is now these laws of privacy, EU GDPR, is not limited just to telecom, but they are a backbone for other industry like banking, IoT, which other panelists were talking about.
Thank you for that. I think we would move on to the next question. Yeah. How does the DPDP bill apply to the telecom sector? Rahul, would you like to take this up, please?
Sure, definitely. And I would also come to the point of comparing DPDP bill with the previous versions and, of course, the GDPR. Whereas the GDPR and the Personal Data Protection Bill 2018-2019 versions were pretty comprehensive in the way they were talking about various parts related to privacy. DPDPB bill in its own right is something, it's just a 24-page document in which they have tried to take the first step towards privacy, I would say, from the Indian perspective. And my personal view on this is that this particular version of a bill is more corporate friendly than being a consumer friendly or a data principal friendly.
Yeah, just to add to Rahul's point, Rahul brought a very good thing that about the service which is given. So if there's a service provider like some telecom company who becomes a data fiduciary, and they are providing me the service, and all of a sudden they ask for some more amount of PII, some other attribute of my PII, and I'm not willing to share that, it is not that the telecom provider is going to stop my service. Why? Because if I've given a consent for PII A, B, C, D, and there's something, and I'm getting the service, and all of a sudden they start asking for another attribute of my PII, and if I don't consent to give and I don't give, it doesn't mean they can stop the service. So these have been very clearly articulated in the bill.
So in addition to those terms and conditions of the license itself, this DPDP bill should aid and help the telecom industry move forward with keeping the data private and secure, definitely. So moving on to the next question. What are the obligations of data fiduciary?
Yeah, so data fiduciaries, they actually get the data from the PII principal, and as other panelists discussed here, that fiduciary is based on trust. So of course their obligations is always to make sure that first of all they should have a good implementation of the security framework, because a privacy framework is an extension of the security. So they have to make sure that they have a sound network with all the controls related with information security in place. They should make sure that the accuracy of the data is maintained. They should make sure that they take all steps of making sure that they prevent any breaches from happening, and if they happen, inform the board in the stipulated time which is written in the law.
Yeah.
Sorry, Bhaskar, just wanted to add a couple of more points to what Kush you mentioned. See, one thing, considering the telecom operators as the significant data fiduciary because of the large volume of data that they will be carrying, one thing which we need to understand is that telecom as a sector over the last few years has been into trying to do some bit on privacy and data confidentiality and things like those, be it the telemarketer, the 1400 scheme which was launched, or even be the DLT which has been implemented as one of the first blockchain applications by the TRI, on the SMS frameworks, on the pesky SMS which have been coming and things like those. They have been trying their bit to control. So here another view that I have is that TRI, as compared to many other regulators, TRI you may say, or RBI you may say, these are the regulators who have a very strong hold. They understand the industry very well. They understand the sector very well. They have been associated with the sector for the longest period of time, and they have been working in the space of data privacy also for a very long period of time. So given this context, if there is a law, rather than we having another regulator, which would be the board in this particular case, why can't the existing regulator itself implement the law? Because they understand the sector much better than any other. And then there can be a uniform approach to this particular bill. There are also aspects wherein TRAI does regular audits of the telecom operators. There is a quality of service audits. There are revenue audits which are being conducted, multiple audits which are conducted. There is a reporting relationship which has already been established and working fine for everybody within the sector. So that is one aspect I think which can be looked at in going forward, that if there can be the existing regulators who can start implementing these rules rather than waiting for a new regulator which to come in, which will unnecessarily put a strain on this very critical sector from a data privacy perspective.
Rahul, I have one thing to add to what you're telling. So you're telling having the same regulator do the privacy stuff. So today we are discussing privacy related things in telecom industry. Just think about the banking in itself is again a huge monster when you talk about privacy. Now we have two regulators. RBI is one regulator for banking and the other one is TRAI. Do you think both of them will coordinate with each other? So I think it's better to have a separate board. I have a different view here, definitely.
Sure.
I think we have discussed the obligations at length, and we will move on to the next question, which is similar one. How will draft bill regulate the privacy risks in the telecom sector? I think this relates to assessment of risk that Sujan was talking about, the PIE, DPIA part.
Yeah.
No,
so when you say about the risk, so what Sujan's told, yes, that's very correct. You start and you take time to do that privacy DPIA, which is data privacy impact assessment. In plain language, you can say it's nothing but a privacy risk assessment. You try to find your harms and the risks and then come up with the control. And especially when you come up with a risk rating, there will be some mathematical formulas, and it takes time, and the organization should take time and try to identify all the risks which are there and try to mitigate them. And risks, again, the risk, when you try to identify the risk, a lot of them would also come from the controls which are actually mentioned within the acts, right? There would be others also, but a lot of them would come from here also, like what does the act says and is there a risk related with that. So make sure that the organizations are doing that. And again, the risks like hacking, and then there are other risks in telecom industry, because the telecom industry is very much heavy on cloud, so they use a lot of cloud services. So making sure when you do the risk assessment for your cloud service provider or anyone in the supply chain is also done, because those all also becomes part of your sub processors. So when we do a risk assessment, make sure that all your sub processors, any vendor which is in the supply chain, the risk assessment or the DPIA, when you do, those risks are also tabulated in and accounted for.
Definitely, Rahul. I think.
And I've seen this happening. So I went to HDFC Bank for opening my daughter's bank account, and they asked for the Aadhaar. Before even taking the Aadhaar, they first gave a form for giving consent of using the Aadhaar. So I've seen the sectors have already started practicing at least taking the consent and having that basic setup in place, which will definitely be there when the act comes, whether it is even if the amendments are there.
Moving on to the next one, how can telecom companies manage data principal rights? Abanish, would you like to take this up, please?
I think one of the important measures is to have a framework where each and every person should know the responsibility as to how they would, what is the role, and what are they supposed to do. For example, it's in a telecom companies, there are different data principles, right, that needs to be managed. So for example, DSR, just an example, I think we need to have a framework where these are addressed in a proper manner. These are something that we have a framework. I mean, who is the team which would manage DSR? For example, in most of the organization, it would be the HR which manages the DSR requests. But what is the mechanism to manage this? Are we actually letting the DSR go in some black hole and is never getting addressed, because while so far, I mean, nothing was coming out of it. Now if these are getting regulated, then there would be issues around that. And that's precisely why at Vodafone we have created our privacy framework purely on a GDPR framework, where organizations, whether they are falling under the jurisdiction of GDPR or not, they follow the principles of GDPR to the T. So that's where we have created that framework already. So we are not too worried as to how this needs to be managed, because we know that for at all the stages we adhere to the principles of privacy, whether it's processing the data for a lawful basis, uh, even the data retention management, the laws of a data subject around right to forget, right of eraser, etc., etc. All of them has already been built in the ecosystem itself, and that's
Sir,
how organizations will start following it.
yeah, Abhinash, just to correct you, not right to forgotten. Right to forgotten is not there in this bill. In fact, instead of right to forgotten, they have written right to erasure. There's
Yeah, no,
difference between,
yeah, yeah. So what I was saying is that in our organization, because we have implemented
following
GDPR
GDPR.
framework, so right of forgotten is inbuilt in that framework itself.
Can penalties under the bill act as a deterrent? Who would like to take this up?
That depends on the company, right?
Yes, I have a mixed view on this. So I would say penalties are high and they are low also. So it might be high for an organization and very low for another organization. And when you talk about telecom industry, it is a significant data fiduciary, right? And for them, it might not be a very big amount.
It might not be a deterrent at all.
Yes,
500 crore in a telecom industry is absolutely
nothing,
nothing.
nothing.
Uh, but also, you'll have to understand that whether a fine can be a deterrent or not also uh, depends on the risk appetite of an organization. See, no companies would want their name on a newspaper, where we're saying that data has been stolen. That's a given. But and that's where the companies who work in different jurisdictions try to safeguard their compliance program in such a manner that they do not have to see such news. But it was more about the financial amount of the penalty vis-a-vis the industry that we are operating about. So 500 crores could be a good amount for a startup, for example. But we are talking about a telecom industry which is very infrastructure heavy industry, and there are lots of investment that's required. So even the cost of compliance is very high, so there, by giving an amount which is not so significant, you are actually allowing organization to not do compliance and rather pay the penalty itself. And that's precisely when I started the discussion, I said that depends on the organization appetite for risk, how far they are willing to go.
Yeah, go ahead. I would say this was a must to have bill for telecom, definitely, and banking also. These two fields where I see are very important to have regulations.
Yeah, for me, one of the thing I think dealing with government is much easier than dealing with the social interested groups, right? If you look at the group that they have in France, none of your business. So they are bringing up all these file suits against companies, who have reached the personal data of individuals like Facebook, Google, Amazon, and even at individual level, like to a single person, they have helped out in filing a lawsuit against them, and they have won several cases as well. So that kind of a same interested group can be created in the backdrop of this DPDP bill in Southeast Asia as well. So that will be another challenge to tackle for telco sector. So we need to be mindful of that aspect as well.
Yes, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I think this was a very enlightening discussion and enlightening for me particularly. Thank you for your time today. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thanks,
for joining.
everybody. Bye bye.
Thank you.